I'm Sasha Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And I'm Dr. T.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things Black mental health. And we are back again, ladies. So super excited. We got an awesome lineup today, awesome guest today. Star, what are we going into?
Okay, so today, we've been talking policing, social justice. I know we're going to talk about this election at some point. But today we're going to talk about, how do we radically reimagine the model of policing in America for Black people so that we don't get killed and so that we're safe and we improve our communities. We know our police are important, but the model is not working. So this is going to be a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with the guests that we have today. We have Miss Lynda R. Williams, who was actually recently sworn in as the new president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, also known as NOBLE. Prior to being named as NOBLE as president, she's currently the professor of the practice at Middle Tennessee State University in the Department of Criminal Justice Administration. And prior to joining the faculty of Middle Tennessee State University, she was experienced as an accomplished career as a veteran of the United States Secret Service from 1988 until she retired as the Deputy Assistant Director in 2017. So we have, like Star said, we have a big one. So,
and Black don't crack. I'm like,
absolutely. So can we call you Lynda, Miss Williams? What do you prefer?
Call me Lynda. We are sisters. Absolutely.
Absolutely. First of all, it's a huge accomplishment retiring at that magnitude in the Secret Service, especially as a Black woman. And I think maybe a great way to segue into this conversation surrounding policing is just if you could share a little bit about, your personal experience and what it has looked like for you as a Black woman, being able to accomplish through those glass doors, and then the experience and the expectation with law enforcement.
Well, first of all, thank you all for having me, Star, from our introduction and for bringing me here today. I think, first of all, too much is given, much is required. I stand here blessed as a 30-year veteran of the United States Secret Service. And no, I wasn't 10 when I started. But even before that, I was a deputy sheriff with the aspirations of becoming a federal agent. And I was a deputy sheriff in Augusta, Georgia. I was the only Black female in my class then. And then even when I came through the doors of the Secret Service in 1988, I was the only African-American woman in my class. And then my second class, I was the only Black. So, it's challenging. But one thing about it, I always believe if you can teach me, I can learn it. And of course, you have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. That means honing on your skill set, knowing your policy, your procedures, knowing your job and knowing your job well. And to be a consummate, to be the consummate professional, you are held at a higher standard. You cannot, have those jokes with them that, are a little discolored. You have to be professional because in order to get respect, to earn respect, you have to show respect. And I'm pretty much a team player as well as a leader. But I always made sure that I took my work and I took it seriously. I always had to compete against my peers, which appeared to be, a majority white male. But that comes with respect when they realize that you are committed to do your job. And then when we come there, we're trained to carry out the profession for which we have to do. And one of the things that was so important to me, even as I climbed the ladder in the Secret Service, they always say when you get the elevator, send it back down. Absolutely. I think that, God allows you to go through things in order to help other people. And that's been my mantra in every walk of my life, whether it's personal or professional, that you have to reach back and help another person because someone had to pave the way for me. And I would hope after 30 years in retiring as a deputy assistant director of the Secret Service, I know that I have made it better for those who come behind me and that I challenged the reform and the very outreach and recruiting efforts that we took to have minorities. When I came on as a Secret Service agent, there was not a Black female supervisor. At the time that I retired, I was the highest at that juncture, but I was preceded by 3 others that had retired before me. But we broke that ceiling and that there had never been an African-American woman sitting on the executive level of the United States Secret Service. And so even through that, as God put it in my heart to become a professor at Middle Tennessee State, which is my alma mater, And the professor of practice is just that. I haven't acquired my doctorate yet, but in all my years, 35 years of work experience, that breadth and that knowledge qualifies me to be a professor. And then even to assimilate into Noble. And Noble is an affinity professional organization, law enforcement organization, because we realize our strength is our unity in our numbers. And Noble has helped me to be prepared to make that climb through the ladder of the Secret Service. But too much is given, much is required. And today I am honored 3 months now as the national president of Noble, with an agenda that I'm sure we'll come to in a minute.
And you've been like on every TV program. I was like, well, we gotta get her. We gotta get her.
Well, you know what? I had never done social media until I became president because of my security background, which is how we met.
Well, so look, and then I talked to my cousin, Cynthia Chase, who like everybody that works at the White House knows Cynthia Chase because she works in security. And she was like, oh, she's amazing. She's amazing.
She's kind.
You know, so okay, with this election, right? And everybody's like, well, Black people, we ain't surprised. Okay, none of us are clearly surprised. Right. But with white people seem to be surprised that the vote for Trump was so high. This is like razor thin. And like literally, to me, Trump represents white supremacy and supporting that establishment. Seeing how many people, Black men too, that are in agreement, if you will, with the construct of whiteness in America. Right. Like, before we even get into policy, like, how do we change?
Well, before start that,
yeah, jump in, Dr. T.
I was going to ask Lynda if she could explain to us a little bit more about what Noble is, and then why is an organization like Noble necessary? Because there are other police organizations. So absolutely. I think for our audience, that might be a really helpful distinction.
Thank you so much. Noble stands for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We were founded in 1976 because of the social inequalities and the dual justice system that we have, and how our Black and brown communities are suffered differently under the criminal justice system. So our mantra is that we serve as the conscience of law enforcement by being committed to justice by action. So what that looks like is law enforcement executives on every level of law enforcement. That's the local, state, and federal level. And we represent those persons, those communities that cannot speak for themselves. And even as we continue to stand through many administrations and trials, we're even more prominent today. And because, you know, our strength is our unity. For Lynda Williams to say, hey, I feel some kind of way, I've been discriminated. But when you have an organization that's respected from the White House down, that is our unity, and that's our strength, that we can speak to those injustices. Even as it talks about policing, even as our recruiting, even as we are individuals of color in this law enforcement community. And so again, we stand as that voice to speak for those inequalities, particularly as we see it play out over and over today in our communities. So we represent that collective voice of executives. A lot of our members are executives, members in other organizations, Tanya, but of course, Noble is the top, and that our membership are basically a majority are executive law enforcement officers. It was once started as a predominantly African-American organization, but today our membership is extended to all across the board, to all walks of life. And of course, I said in all areas of law enforcement.
So given your position, like what is and I'm glad you jumped in there, Dr. T, because that's a key distinction. Like you guys aren't just Black law enforcement, you're Black law enforcement executives at like high level leadership ranks. Like what is, before we get policy, like we got a white supremacy issue, obviously, we all know that in this country. Like this is for everybody, but definitely, you know, Lynda, you know, you our guest. Like where do we go? How we even gonna talk about policing when white people are scared of Black people? Are scared we're gonna finally take out vengeance or something? I don't know.
And so, you know, with that, you know, when too much is given, much is required. And you complimented me on being on the national airways. One thing that's unique about me as the national president, most of the presidents that preceded me were active chiefs of police or, you know, sitting in federal level. Lynda R. Williams is happily retired. So I don't have that oversight of speaking and, and worried about, the pushback from a city manager or mayor or to even offend anybody. But I can speak truth to that power. One of my first interviews was against the Attorney General of the United States. We were in a closed meeting and I was just in office all of a week. And he had made the statement that systemic racism does not exist. And so I was in a room of white colleagues and there was no agenda and they were complimenting him on his greatness. So Lynda R. Williams pulled off her face mask and drank her water. And I said, excuse me, sir, just because one has not experienced such does not negate its existence. You stated that, systemic racism does not exist. I challenge you to think differently. I said, just because you have to acknowledge a problem before you can confront or solve a problem. So he canted his head and he said, so you seeing systemic racism is in all of law enforcement? And I said, no, it is a microcosm of society. And if it exists in society, it exists in law enforcement. And that's not anything that I need you to tell me as an African-American woman born in this brown skin. I know this to be true. And so, and of course, it kind of ignited there, and that's how I got on CNN, and it's just been on before. But I say that because, when you are given that platform and when you're put in that position to be able to boldly to speak truth to power, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. You come across as intelligent and for what you know, and our strength, and because Noble is recognized, and we're invited to the table at the White House and the Department of Justice and any other platform, then I can boldly say that. And in that, collectively, then we can bring attention to that. But you have to first acknowledge that a problem exists before you can even start to resolve it.
So with that said, I mean, you taking your platform, your experience, and being able to, as you mentioned, speak within truth and within courage, despite who was around you, and say that, hey, this is not the case. This is not what's happening in America. How do you then collectively work with people who feel indifferently and get to a solution when you have so many white people, both white men and women who I've run across, who in their mind really believe that this problem isn't there, and who believe that even in law enforcement, it wasn't about being Black or in criminal justice system. But when we clearly see that, a white man and a Black man can do the same crime and get different time, how do you work towards a solution in that?
And, and sometimes we have to agree to not agree, but most important, you don't know what exists if I don't put it out there. You can say, oh, I didn't know that, or it's not applicable. I always say you never notice a red card till you get a red card. And so a lot of times, and my colleagues, and the white law enforcement officers can deny that because they never had to exist it. But at that round table that we sit down and say, you know what, I'm not trying to sell you on it, but I'm trying to educate you that it does exist. And through a myriad of different platforms and forums, and on one of my initiatives as the national president, is a platform, a task force entitled Reimagining Public Safety. And we talk about those issues. We talk about those issues as, how disproportionate, how, society and even this present administration want to take the word diversity and inclusion out, when of course that's what our country was founded on. So again, you have to put it out there, and whether they recognize it or not, you have to let them know that it exists. And then you have to find a solution. And sometimes you don't come home with all the wins, but at least you have, you planted a seed. And a lot of people more are that we have in common than that is different. And so even some of the white colleagues, they never recognized that because they had never been in that platform, or they've been in that position. And so, what, they do tend to side that, Noble, Lynda, her colleagues, these are my professional colleagues, and I didn't know. And of course, people don't know what they don't know, but when you're held accountable, then, there's an obligation that you have to respond to it.
Dr. T, chime in here from the mental capacity, one of the strength that it takes to do and trail and just blaze the trails that Lynda is doing, but then also the toughness of being able to not be adverse, be, y'all, my words, adversarial. What's it?
Yeah, yeah,
Adversarial.
adversarial. Yeah.
Adversarial.
I know, girl.
Yeah.
But to not come off in that way of what they will quickly label you as bitter, angry, and you could be calm as ice, and it's you're angry, especially when you start tapping in on that truth. How do how do you do that psychologically?
Well, obviously it takes, great skill and great resolve, great strength and great courage, all of us standing on the shoulders of our ancestors to do those kinds of things, because those are the kind of things they did. But what it really takes is just the willingness to open your mind and open your heart and be brave. So many of us are so afraid to be bold, to speak truth to power, to speak what we know, because we've been taught for so long to be quiet and to be courteous. And we are supposed to be those things, but there is a way to be powerful and courteous, and to be powerful and to be strong and courteous and polite and respectful and be heard. And we have to practice that skill as Black people, because we have spent so much time really, Star, you talk a lot about the mindset of the oppressed, right? So we have been oppressed for so long that we start to think that if we don't behave that way, we don't have value. And so we have to summon our courage, remember all of the things that we probably forgot. One of the things we think about when children, they will say anything, right? They will just tell the truth. They're not trying to be mean. They're not trying to be hurtful. They just speak what they see. And if we could regain some of that as adults, when we're in these rooms, and just have the courage to say what we know to be true. It's not adversarial. I'm not saying that you have been exposed to systemic racism. I'm saying it does exist. And here's 18 examples in my life, like it's very easy when you just keep it personal. And I think when people do things like try to label us as, oh, they're angry, they're bitter, that's just a way to mute our voices. And that's just a way to try to discredit our story. And you just have to have that resolve. We have resiliency as individuals and as people that has gotten us thus far. And we have to keep relying on that to keep pushing forward. And sometimes I was coaching a young man earlier this week, and he's a one-trick pony where everything is adversarial. And he's like, but that's gotten me results. And I'm like, but where do you want to go in your future? Right? We have to have different ways of, sometimes the adversarial approach is good, but sometimes that calm, respectful, like, oh my gosh, he just cussed me out and didn't say a curse word, right? So we have to have all different types of strategies and tools and skills, especially as we get the opportunity to sit in these rooms. But it doesn't matter what room you sit in. I tell families all the time, if you're at the table at your school with your child's teacher, you need to speak your truth and your child's truth.
Absolutely.
You can't just accept, the whitewashed version of what you're supposed to be.
And Dr. T, just to piggyback on that, I think one of the key things is two things. I always have two things. Is the first is to create space, right? So when we are like this, we're reacting. So when you're like, you said this, the Attorney General says this, I'm gonna say this, you're not thinking, you're not processing, and you're not actually aiming towards a goal. Your ego is responding, your emotions are responding. You're like 400 plus years of oppression, of active oppression is what's at the table, versus when you create mental pause and space and allow yourself to process, that's the first thing. So build space so that you can respond versus just react to this, people's feedback. And the second thing, like I'm really writing and studying on trying to apply that unconditional, transformative approach of love in understanding and hearing people, because white people are not ready. They are not mentally or emotionally prepared to understand racism. That's just the truth. And it's structured that way because our school systems and our educational systems were built so that they themselves don't understand what whiteness has done in this world. So there's stuff coming from, well, I didn't do it. I don't own slaves. So there's a way that we're going to have to learn to listen and understand, but also not take off the table what we need. And it doesn't have to be like, I don't like you, you're racist. Yeah, you might be a racist. Oh, well, okay, so what? I need this, and I'm not walking out of this room until I get that.
And if I can echo with everything you said, it's everything, that skill set, you saying being present, your communication style, but more so not besides than just being bold. I don't need you to validate me. I don't need you to validate me. I need you to see that I am an individual with my own opinion and my own thoughts, and I have a right to express it. Even as I was talking to Attorney General Barr, I said, I challenge you to think. But I didn't say you are wrong or whatever. I said, just food for thought. And so, and that was the question that was asked me, did you think he was going to change his mind? That's that's God. My thing is that at least he's been told. He probably had never been spoken to like that, and it wasn't negative. But I don't need you to validate me. I know who I am. I know whose I am, and I stand and I speak intelligently and respectfully. That we can agree to disagree, but I need you to acknowledge that I am here, and this is what I have to bring. And I'm like you. Never sit at a table and you don't have anything to say.
Mm. Another thing is we can expect when we have the opportunity, no matter what table you're going to sit at, like it can be the kitchen table playing cards with a neighbor. I mean, I think that's one of the things this election has taught a lot of people, that we don't know our neighbors. When we see our neighbors put up signs of political candidates that don't represent us, and we're next door thinking we all share the same values, we're learning that you might be sitting at any table. So you might be sitting, I literally had a conversation last night with a woman from Puerto Rico who said her neighbor put out a Trump sign, and she said, don't come over here and get my soup no more if you're going to keep that sign in your yard. And that was the beginning of a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. But it's that willingness to understand that you are going to experience these things. So be ready. Whatever table you're sitting at, be ready. Know that there is a very high likelihood that somebody is not going to understand what you're talking about or what you're going through. And in order to move the conversation forward in a productive manner, you will need to offer something to help steer the conversation in the right direction.
So, Lynda, with that said, talk to us about, newly the national president, a big deal. How are you going to utilize your breadth of experience in trailblazing Noble now and new initiatives, new policies? What are some of your initiatives that you plan and what you envision for Noble and how it can impact Black law enforcement?
So not only walking the walk and talking the talk, I mean, I stand on 35 years of experience. So, that's the credibility right there. But even more so at this juncture in my life, to look back at it from a different perspective. I had a 3-part agenda when I came in as president in July. It was police reform, gun violence, and also a voter initiative, a national voter initiative. And I challenged the 50 plus chapters of Noble and our constituents to, get in voter engagement. And so our target was historically Black colleges and universities. So we partnered with them, and we created on our website where there was a link in order that you could register, you could check your status, and I forgot the third one. And then we also had a partnership with Lyft that we provided free transportation to the polls. So all of this is, I think it was to see when your early registration dates or something like that. But we gave the tools so that people could. And, I told, although we were targeting the HBCUs, but if we got 10 people that weren't going to vote initially, it has been a success. And the thing about it is so easy when someone put it before you. Everybody has a phone, everybody has some internet, that you click on it, and it was just that easy. And so we avail ourselves. And so Noble, we are an extension of the very communities that we serve. And it was most important at this time, at this juncture, that no other president, had come in like I did, that, this hot ticket was this voting, and that's why we're here today. But, and even I encourage my students to vote, because I told them, you cannot complain about anything if you don't vote. And it's pertaining to every culture and every origin. And so those were my 3 targets. And so walking it out just from experience, from being a woman of my age to know and have come through various campaigns. And let me just give you the caveat. This is the first presidential campaign since 1988 that I wasn't actively working, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And so, yeah, so, and of course, with that experience and with my colleagues and even teaching in criminal justice, it's not just trial by fire, but as you walk the walk and talk the talk, and then you stay abreast of what's going on, that, I sit with my board and other members of my organizations. And so even when I'm called to speak on certain issues that I think someone else got, a little more depth into it, I readily relinquish that so they can hear from a sitting chief versus me speaking from around the situation.
So as we get into the policy questions, or just, maybe a little bit more into the policy piece, there's a lot of talk around the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights as we try to start figuring out ways to kind of create a better policing culture in America that requires and mandates accountability on our officers. There's just talk, that's the buzzword, Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. Can you first give us what is the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights? Is it state? Is it federal? And how does that weigh into that conversation around officer accountability? Because for those that haven't worked in law enforcement, it's really some of the protections, I don't even think Dr. T, who's a medical doctor, has those level of protections in her career. So I don't think most of us are familiar with how law enforcement actually works.
So law enforcement, of course, and even as I teach it comes from a very tumultuous history where, it started out with slave patrols. And even as we have permeated throughout history, that automatically puts the African American as a disadvantage, because even as we have, tenured through all of these years, that mentality sometimes still, resonates in the back of, person's minds. And so each individual organization is just that. And that's why Noble is pushing national standards, because every organization has its own policies, its own rules. And even that Police Bill of Rights, I haven't seen one in years, is established by different police agencies. And it's just that to also give coverage to their officers and just, as a creed to go by. But the problem is it's not nationalized, so it's discretionary that, how those duties are carried out. And in this era of accountability, it lacks that. And so that's what the greatest reform is, that of course you've given that authority to enact and protect and serve, but that still gives you accountability. There's a way that you have to carry out your duties and responsibilities. You owe it to the communities that you serve, and they have a right. They have a right to be able to speak to that, whether, their constitutional rights are violated or just a basic treatment. And so again, until we can have that accountability, that transparency, but co-officers are accountable, and this starts from the top all the way down, then, these things continue to play out. And that's why, we have these bad organizations. Some people said there's some bad apples. I say there's some bad orchards, because it permeates throughout the organization, because they have allowed that. And until it's challenged on a national level and standards to it, then we can see some difference in, some of these things not happening as often, and definitely not as visible as they have. And these things have happened. And with cameras and everything else, it puts it on Front Street. But what makes it so bad is so egregious, and it keeps playing this stuff out over and over. It's like one incident does not negate or stop another one from happening.
The police officer's Bill of Rights, is it something that protects the officer, or is it something that the citizen is supposed to
it's supposed
get
to
protection from?
It's a dual responsibility. And, Tasha, I can't speak exactly, because like I said, it's been years since I've seen one because again, we believe in, their standards, regardless of what agency or organization, like use of force, accountability, prohibition of certain holds, and, mandatory that you render aids. And those things are universal. So regardless of what these creeds of police rights, I cannot speak, it's just been so long, but it was supposed to be a dual purpose for the citizens to feel comfortable with the police officers that are assigned to protect them, but also to give, the police officers a platform in which to do their jobs.
And just a little education on a law enforcement officer bill of rights. You're right. There's a federal law, and then there's the states enacting their individual code, or their individual bill of rights. And so its genesis is very centric to protect citizen, protect officer. However, because this goes into the whole states' rights thing. When you get into the state stuff, it gets dicey because each state then has an ability to say, well, I think protecting my officers means X or Y. And so two of the big things that at least I've been hearing around the Hill are, the concern around how we protect officers, meaning like, are your files sealed? So like if you were to commit a crime or you were to have an issue in your record, it would not, many states, and I want to say more than I don't want to use numbers because I don't have my board here, but many states, it would not be permissible for that to be even shown to like your new hiring officer, your new, county. So I could do something terrible in Prince George's County here in Maryland, and then I could go get hired in Washington, D.C., and my record would almost virtually be sealed.
Right.
And so that's one of the things. And then the second thing was around, I think the adjudication process. So how is an officer corrected, or how are they fired? That process, because like one of my dad's very good friends, my dad used to be the fire union rep, and his other friend was the police union rep. They were good buddies. And he explained to me a couple of weeks ago, he said, the thing is with officers that's so difficult because of that Bill of Rights, depending on the state, but many of them have this construct that a lot of officers get what we see is fired in the news, but what ends up actually happening because of their Bill of Rights, they have a case for wrongful termination, and then they end up either getting rehired or they get the sue for back pay. And he's like, it's literally like that Bill of Rights is the key thing, is that it makes it very, very hard to actually legally and rightfully terminate a problematic officer.
It is. And one thing that we are pushing in that legislation is the national database for those officers who have that are recidivists in those, misuse of force and things like that, so that they cannot just easily slide under the fence into another agencies. When there is a pattern of egregious behavior, that goes before, just like anything else, like a credit rating, that you need to know that, and you should know that. And yes, no, you're talking a whole nother realm when we're talking about, that it's hard for the very chiefs of police and, director of security to discipline or to release those officers from duty. They are protected from, like you say, that, and they're protected under the, FOPs. And it comes into a problem when, a police chief is charged to do what he or she's supposed to do, is to protect and serve and the citizens of that community. But when their hands are tied and there's conflicts with politics within the organization, and even with the same city manager or mayor that put them in position, then they are tied, and that these things can go unscathed because they're protected. And so that's a whole nother boat and a whole nother battle. But a lot of that, because, FOP was created to be a safeguard for the police officers, to make sure their rights were preserved. But it wasn't supposed to be a safety net for bad officers, that it makes it hard for a chief or an executive to expel or get rid of an individual without going through much litigations and fights, just to do what you should be able to do.
So, I mean, with that said, is there something that Noble can do to help change that? Because I mean, we've had, I think, a few police officers on the show who, they'll speak, but they won't really speak into certain things because they don't want to go, as we would call, the shield. They don't want to go against the shield. And And so, how do we encourage, more officers to, because what we know is that all officers aren't bad, but how do we encourage the ones who aren't to be able or be willing to take a stand against the ones who are? Because I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that through all your years of experience, especially even working down in Georgia, and then even being with the Secret Service, has there ever been moments where you've had to say, hey, that's not right? How do you not be afraid to go against the big brother up top?
It's an individual thing, and yes, I have, and yes, I did, and yes, I do, because you know what, there are consequences. You don't know if you're going to be retaliated against, and that has happened. You don't know if you're going to be ostracized. That has happened. But I just believe if you stand on truth and you stand on that, and you are, yeah, and you're vetted in that. But again, if you're doing it by yourself, you're just one person in the wilderness. And that's the importance of Noble, that we can stand collectively. One of the things of my task force, I have law enforcement executives from every level. And at the at the end of this 90 days, the task force is producing a report that I would gladly share. But we're going to socialize that throughout law enforcement, but more important with community leaders, with politicians, and in the halls of Congress, because again, that's the unity is our strength. So Lynda Williams saying it by herself, not so much, but when you have, people that are in respected positions are saying this even from the top, because, they could get one, yeah, Lynda Williams, but to retaliate against a whole group is a little more difficult. And so that's why we have to be bold to speak it. And no, it's not easy. And yes, Lynda, I was pointed out, I was that one. They knew to shut up when I came in the room. But at the end of the day, you know what, I was respected. And you know what I always say, I spell my name with a Y, make sure you spell it correctly. So you have to, and anytime you go against the grain, it's not a popularity, but I don't regret any of that, because I know when I came into the Secret Service, I could count the number of African-American female agents. They still got a long ways to go, but we have come up. And and because those of us that sacrificed, and those of us that had to go through litigations to make the service, just like any other organization, recognize you're wrong. And and it's hard to, and people don't like to go into litigations, but when you talk dollars and cents and all of this, and it was a long fight, and I've been tasked by other federal agencies to say, help us fight this. And it's just another day, because you cannot do it, and you cannot change things if you don't acknowledge it. And you gotta be bold, and someone has to be that person. And here am I.
What could you say to like our audience who, as Star and Sasha have both said, we know as Black people that we need more Black police officers, but when we see Black police officers, we don't see always the reflection of us. We don't see them standing up for us. We don't see them speaking up for us. It seems like they start to blend into the blue more than the Black. But I know that's got to be incredibly difficult. And so how do we as community members balance that, support them so that they can have the strength and courage to do exactly what you just said?
I'm asked that question quite often, the dilemma in being a Black officer, and, and then of course, you're standing with your community. Under the 21st century policing model that came under the Obama administration, community policing is just that. You're an extension of your community. That's why it was so easy for me to put that voting initiative. That's part of the community. But when we take those uniforms off, when we take those shields and those guns on the bedside table, then we are that man and woman. You wouldn't know that I was a police officer if I didn't have on my identifying equipment. And so it's important that we build a rapport, because in order for people to respect you, they got to know you. And so as members of our communities, we catch it from, like you said, other people in the community think that you're a sellout. You get it from the department because, hey, you one of us, and then even the politics of it all. But I tell everybody, you remain professional for the job that you were assigned to do. You're held accountable. Now, you can't tell me that I can't sympathize and empathize with the Black community because that is my history, that's my heritage, but you still can do a job. And so you still have to be held accountable, you still have to be professional, but you have to be bold because I mean, even before we got to where we are today, there was many times that I had to correct my, my colleagues that were white or some other ethnic that didn't understand. And a lot of times they don't know what they don't know, but you can't be afraid to speak the truth. And, and a lot of times when people want acceptance, they'll shrink. But the thing about it, people they're gonna judge you who you are. So are you gonna be judged as a sellout and that you try to fit in? Or for somebody that, you know what, I don't like her, but she spoke the truth. She spoke her mind. And so it takes that boldness. And so with the officers, they have to show themselves outside of uniform. They have to show themselves in their community, at the rec center, in the gym, just as everybody else, those members of your church when we were going to church, and all of that. So we are ordinary people. And one of the key programs that Noble has is called the Law in Your Community, where it's a program that was co-signed by the COPS office and Department of Justice. And it's an interactive program where we as trained, we have trained certified trainers that go into various organizations. It can be elementary school, it can be colleges, young adults. And it's our interactive conversation between law enforcement and that group. We put on scenarios, we let them know what your rights are, how you're supposed to respond. And even when you don't like what is happening, that you're not going to be adversarial right there because you're not going to win, but there's a process to being, protective and knowing how to, get the information and make a report of it. I challenge everyone that I always talk to when it comes to police relations. My challenge to you is to get home safely every night, safely, not in a bag, not in a car, not in an ambulance, come home safely, and that's what this program is, to show that we are your communities. And even still, there's a way to deal with law enforcement because they're ordinary people out there trying to do a job and make a difference.
Well, Lynda, you bring up a good point though. So we talk about, how the community can get home safe. I think something that isn't talked about too as much as the community side is the officer side. Are these officers truthfully mentally well, emotionally well enough to take on this type of job and role where you are going to be in situations of escalation and you have to be able to keep yourself and your emotions in check? It seems like as a community member, I'm gonna speak broadly, which is never right, but whatever. We gonna speak. You said speak freely, right? Right. Oh, by the way, I know if you walked in the room, I would know you was a cop. I'd be like, oh, no. Bravo, y'all. I'm just messing with you. But seriously, you have to have a lot of composure just for being day to day, just a Black person. I can't even imagine if I'm from somewhere out Midwest, I ain't never even been around no Black people. And then I'm now an officer in Fulton County with nothing but Black people. And we talking loud. We do things that white people don't interpret well. They don't understand. So you just talking your normal way. And they're like, you need to calm down. I've had a police officer be like, ma'am, and I'm like, sir, I'm just asking you a question. All right. I know my rights. Okay.
We say in Noble all the time that culture is policy. The ideal picture is that you recruit people out of that community because they understand that. But in reality, just like that scenario you just painted. So if you are a white officer in Fulton County or PG, it's your obligation to learn the community that you're serving. That, like you said, that we get, as they say, animated when we're excited and we're laughing and we're talking, and it's all in fun for us. And if you misunderstand that or misinterpret that, it can come across differently. You have an obligation to learn the culture of your people, that, this is what they do. This is not an anomaly. And these idiosyncrasies are not idiosyncrasies in this community. And so again, that's important from the top going down, that that chiefs of police and directors have to make sure that their officers become acquainted, as primitive as it may sound, but when you're walking on doing a foot patrol, you are at eye level, you dealing with people, and you have to get out there and deal with your community, not when things happen, not when it's, a controversial, adversarial, or, they're recording you taking somebody down. that respect is that they know that you are there as their guardian, not as an occupying force. And so it takes you to go beyond, and it comes from leadership, in addition to, you know, just your self-worth of what and how effective you want to be as an officer.
I think as we close out here, Lynda, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of, you know, as you begin to work on things, not just from a local level, but from a national level, and how some of those, the same just words that you have spoken into that hopefully maybe can influence some other unions, some other police departments, and even as you mentioned, being invited to the White House, sitting at certain tables, so that we can start really seeing a change, because we're not seeing it, and so there's people who don't feel that guardianship, and so just anything that you would leave and as a note to the listeners and just to your mission.
Thank you for the opportunity. And one thing, Star, you asked me about mental health, and that's so important. You know, even before we got to where we are in our policing society today, you know, suicide was on a alarming rate in the last couple of years. And then, of course, you know, we have to be proactive instead of reactive, that, you know, officers do care a whole lot. You know, even people ask me with everything that's on my plate, you know, I believe in taking care of your star player. I start out my day every day in prayer and meditation. And then you know what? I got the strongest feet. I walk 5 miles at least every day, 5 times a week, nothing less than. And then you have to take care of yourself. So you have to take the oxygen before you can give it to anybody else. But even as we are coming into such a time in these uncertainties as it relates to law enforcement, you know, again, you have to acknowledge a problem before you can resolve a problem. That means that we have to assess it, we have to address it, and then we have to correct it. And those are not easy things done. And, you know, I'm asked, am I optimistic? Yes, I'm very hopeful. I'm a believer. And I don't think you'll come home with all of the victories, but if I can change some of the things to make it better for those who come behind me, and that cause we have to sit down and we have to have those uncomfortable conversations. You have to have those conversations. Everything is not a key and he conversation. You have to deal with the real issues. And at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, and my 365 as a national president is up, I want to help push that envelope a little further, that justice must be fair, justice must be equal, and justice must be transparent. We cannot have a dual citizen, a criminal justice system for some and not the others. We have to have justice that is equal for all Americans. And, you know, that's a long time and it's a hard thing coming. But if we can make progress from where I started in my administration until I end, then we have made some progress. So we have to keep talking. We have to keep lifting our voices. We have to keep having those intelligent conversations and not be afraid to speak the truth.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dr. T, weigh in.
I would say this week, I want to challenge people to have the courage to have allied conversations. One of the things that we have said repeatedly, and I want to just really lay it out clearly for people to understand, we keep being surprised as Black people that white people or other skinned people don't know about systemic racism. Well, why would they? Like, if you have not been exposed to something, I think about the first time I took my mother to sushi, because I love sushi. So I was so excited to take her to sushi, and she saw the little green stuff on the plate, and she was like, "Oh, what is this?" and popped it in her mouth. And I was like, "Ah!" And it's like she had never experienced wasabi. She's a smart woman. She's lived a long time, but she had never experienced wasabi. And then she got a very hard pill of wasabi, right? So why do we expect white people who, for the vast majority, many of them don't even interact with Black people? So why do we expect them to understand our plight when we have never actually had an allied conversation with them? So if you have white people or yellow people or red people or any color people in your circle, have the courage to have an allied conversation with them. And if you are a white person or a red person or a yellow person or whatever, have the courage to ask your Black friends, like, please, let's sit down and you help me understand.
Right.
That's the only way we're going to start making progress in this area. We can't expect people to understand our experience if they have none of it of their own.
Exactly.
Star.
I love that, Dr. T. You know I love that. And I love the prayer and meditation. I start my day that way too. I have two things, as always. So my first one is, I love having the conversation. I would say bring with you radical listening skills and radical clear communication, where we don't shave anything off the top, but we also don't come to the table with a spirit of I don't know what the right word is, but where we're ready to bring on that one person, the 400 plus years and everything that's happening in media. So some people may not be ready to have that conversation in very just truth, especially given what's going on with the election and everything else in the world. You got to check yourself first. Am I healthy and well enough and mentally on point enough to have that conversation today? And then I think the second thing is, I believe in us hearing and understanding each other, but then I also will challenge us is that, I am not appealing to your humanity. I'm having the conversation so I can understand you from a negotiation standpoint, but it is time to come to the table with what we need and with clear and defined ask. We know that there is always an impetus to do a study. There's always an impetus to have, like, the 21st Century Policing Initiative. It's miraculous. We had a conversation with Attorney Griggs. We didn't even know the thing existed. He's like, the answers is right there.
Yep.
If you did all of them 64 or whatever number steps, you transform policing in America. But there's no mandate for the 21st Century Policing Initiative. So we have to come off of our position of being allowed soft victories. It is time for hard wins, So don't give me a study and not follow it up with the mandate and an implementation budget and a mandate to fund it and sustain it for over a period of time, and then to assess the performance of it. So I want us to become more businesslike in how we negotiate and how we lobby and advocate for what is critical to keep our community safe. So listen, come with radical listening skills, use it as a business tool to be able to understand your opponent, and then go to the table with what you need, and don't let up. And come ready to negotiate and to stand up and say, no, that's not enough. Because I'll be very honest, I was very disheartened to see what was the first initial, and I knew it was politics. We have an election coming. There's a lot of optics and whatnot. I understood that. But I was truthfully disheartened to see what was brought on the table in the response to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and the so many other names that we'll never know or remember.
I think that in closing, I would just say, in similar fashion, one thing that Star mentioned in making the hard ask and being at the table is to be mindful that if you get the no at that table, that there's still another table to go to. And, one thing, and I've said this to Star before, and I've said it on the show, is that, she just goes right on to the next one. All right, next table. Who can give
Everybody's got a boss.
Right. Who can give me the answer? Who can say yes? And so I think in chasing those wins, demanding those wins, we have to be, okay, let's go to the next table. And as Lynda so eloquently put, you have to be brave, and Dr. T, and just challenging people to have those conversations and understand when a conversation sometimes is not serving you. I've been in situations where I've tried to have the conversation, and I know that I'm being kind and I'm being eloquent. I know. And I've had it happen where someone said, well, you're just angry. And I had to say, I'm not angry at all. And you know what? I think you've made some great points. You have an incredible day. Like, you have to think about when the conversation is no longer serving you, right, and move to the next one, because sometimes people don't want to know, but I do agree with the sentiment that there are some people who just don't understand. I won't say that they don't know, I think it's untrue that white people these days don't know. I think sometimes they don't understand. But I think that being willing at times not to give them grace for their ignorance, but to give them grace to try to form an ally and get them to understand, because we need everybody to help this along. It's unfortunate, but this is where we are. And so, Lynda, I just want to thank you. I'm wishing you much success in your in just your new role. I think that you're going to make an incredible president. I just can tell by talking to you. We're honored for you to have joined our media. And with that said, everybody, please follow Amerikan Therapy with a K. And we love you, and we out.
Thank you.